Close your eyes and drift back across the slow river of time. In this quiet journey, we will explore the evolution of the human brain, how it grew, changed, and awakened across millions of years. With each breath, we will trace the silent steps of our ancestors, from primitive beginnings to the unfolding of thought itself. Let your mind relax as we journey inward, into the most mysterious organ of all. Long before humans ever walked the earth, before mammals even stirred in the underbrush, life began its slow and silent dance toward complexity. The story of the human brain begins not with people or even animals as we know them, but with the simplest stirrings of life, billions of years ago, in the stillness of Earth's early oceans. Some of the earliest forms of life had no brains at all. Tiny, single-celled organisms drifted and pulsed, responding to their environment in basic, chemical ways. Over time, these forms grew more complex, banding together into multicellular creatures. Among them were the ancestors of modern jellyfish and worms, beings with simple nerve nets, sensing light, pressure, and movement without central control. This was the beginning of sensation, the faint whisper of awareness. About 600 million years ago, the first centralized nervous systems appeared in early bilaterians, symmetrical creatures with a head and tail, back and belly. A central line of nerve cells began to run down the body, allowing faster and more coordinated movement. It was not yet a brain as we know it, but it was the seed from which all brains would grow. As life flourished in the Cambrian seas, some animals began to explore more sophisticated forms of perception and behavior. Eyes grew more complex, bodies became more mobile. These changes placed demands on nervous systems to organize, prioritize, and respond. Slowly, the clusters of nerve cells near the head, ganglia, expanded, forming primitive brains. One of the first major breakthroughs came with vertebrates. Around 500 million years ago, early fish-like creatures evolved a spinal cord and a three-part brain: the forebrain, midbrain, and hindbrain. The hindbrain helped regulate balance and basic bodily functions. The midbrain processed visual and auditory input. The forebrain was small, but it would one day become the seat of memory, planning, and imagination. With these changes, the nervous system began not just to react to the world, but to model it. Some ancient fish could track prey, remember past locations, and make decisions. Though simple by modern standards, these were the first sparks of what we might call thought. Time passed, and life moved onto land. Amphibians, reptiles, and eventually mammals emerged, each with increasingly complex brains. But something extraordinary was happening within one lineage, the synapsids. Among these mammal-like creatures, the brain began to expand, slowly at first, then rapidly. Over millions of years, the neocortex, a newer outer layer of brain tissue, began to grow. This sheet of neurons allowed more flexible behavior, better memory, and advanced learning. In nocturnal mammals, it helped process smells and sounds in complex ways. In primates, it became a tool for navigating social lives and forest environments. As these mammals climbed trees and formed groups, their brains adapted. Eyes shifted forward for depth perception. Fingers grew nimble. The brain began to integrate touch, sight, and motion into coordinated, intelligent action. And in the branches of ancient forests, the roots of our human brain were quietly taking hold. This story, of sensation turning to perception and perception to cognition, is not a sudden leap, but a long, slow evolution. At each stage, life grew more aware, more adaptive, more complex. The brain did not appear fully formed, but unfolded over time like a spiral, layer by layer. And so, in the quiet oceans and humid forests of Earth's deep past, the architecture of the human mind began to take shape. It was not yet capable of language, of art, or science. But the foundations had been laid. As we close this first chapter, breathe gently and let the thought settle. That your every idea, your every dream, has a lineage stretching back to the very first nerve impulse, deep in the waters of a world that no longer exists. Let us now drift forward through time, from the shadowy forests of early mammals to the leafy canopies of the primates. Here, the brain begins a quiet transformation, not through leaps, but through gentle increments, shaped by light, sound, social bonds, and memory. Roughly 60 million years ago, the first true primates emerged in what is now Asia and Africa. These creatures were small, tree-dwelling animals. Their hands could grasp branches. Their eyes faced forward, allowing them to judge depth. They lived among the leaves, navigating a complex, three-dimensional world where survival required more than instinct. It required learning. The primate brain began to swell in size, particularly in the neocortex. This expansion was not merely for movement or hunting. It served a deeper function: to understand and remember, to make choices, to observe others, and adapt. In the treetops, being social became a powerful advantage. Those who could remember the actions of others, who shared food, who posed threats, had a better chance at surviving. Over generations, the ability to cooperate, to empathize, to read emotions became a form of intelligence. The brain adapted to these needs. The prefrontal cortex, tucked behind the forehead, began to develop in new ways. It helped with planning and decision-making. It allowed for restraint, for imagining future outcomes, for balancing risk and reward. In time, these features would help pave the way for civilization itself. But for now, they were quiet shifts, unseen, unfolding in the background of life. About 25 million years ago, a group of primates called the Old World monkeys split from the apes. The apes, gorillas, chimpanzees, and eventually humans would go on to develop the largest brains in proportion to body size of any land animals. But why? The reasons are many, and they speak to the subtle pressures of evolution. Some scientists believe that foraging for fruit played a role. Fruits are seasonal, scattered, and sometimes hidden. To find them, an animal must remember where certain trees are, when they bear fruit, and how to get there efficiently. This mental mapping required memory, prediction, and problem-solving. Others point to the role of social complexity. As groups grew larger, relationships became more intricate. Alliances shifted, status changed. Individuals had to keep track of who was dominant, who could be trusted, who had children, and who might help in times of need. These silent mental calculations became vital, shaping not just behavior but brain architecture. Among the great apes, one branch became especially unique: the hominins. These were our direct ancestors, and they began to walk upright, freeing the hands to do new things. With hands no longer needed for walking, they could now grasp tools, manipulate objects, and explore the world in ways no other animal could. The brain responded. As hands became more dexterous, the parts of the brain responsible for motor control and sensory feedback expanded. Touch, sight, and motion merged into coordinated, precise action. Objects were no longer just part of the environment. They could be shaped, carried, and used. The world became a toolkit. Communication also began to evolve. While other animals could vocalize or gesture, early hominins may have developed more complex ways to signal intent, share discoveries, and coordinate tasks. The brain began to integrate sound, intention, and memory. While still far from language, the building blocks were forming. And so, through a combination of environmental demands and social pressures, the primate brain continued its slow growth. From fruit hunting to friendship, from grooming rituals to tool making, intelligence became more than survival. It became an asset that could be passed down through generations. Unlike physical traits, which must be inherited, ideas could be taught. Skills could be observed. Behaviors could spread within a lifetime. This ability, to learn from others, to imitate, to teach, became one of the defining traits of our lineage. As the sun rose and set on ancient Africa, early hominins looked out from the forests and into the grasslands. Their brains were not yet human, but they carried within them a potential, a quiet readiness. The story of cognition was accelerating, but still unfolding in silence. Now, as you breathe in and feel the passage of time settle over you, reflect on this, that the brain within your skull once began as a network of nerve cells drifting in ancient seas, and through countless slow awakenings, it has become a vessel for thought, memory, and awareness. Let us continue this gentle journey, for the story of the human brain has only just begun. Let us now gently follow the winds of time to a moment when the earth grew drier, when forests gave way to golden savannas, and the first members of the genus Homo stepped into the morning light of eastern Africa. 2.5 million years ago, the climate began to shift. With forests shrinking, early hominins faced new challenges in the open plains. The world had changed, and so too would the mind that navigated it. From the shadows of Australopithecus, a new form began to emerge. More upright, more agile, more curious, this was Homo habilis, meaning handy man. Not the first to use tools, perhaps, but among the first to shape them with intention. Simple flakes of stone chipped from river rocks marked the beginning of a new way of thinking. A mind that could imagine a use for something that did not yet exist. In these moments, a quiet revolution stirred in the brain. Tool-making required more than strength. It demanded foresight, control, and learning. And with each tool passed from one hand to another, knowledge began to stretch beyond a single lifetime. The brain of Homo habilis was larger than its ancestors, reaching nearly 600 cubic centimeters. Still small by modern standards, but a step along a winding path. With this expansion came improved coordination, more refined motor skills, and the early sparks of symbolic thought. As the millennia drifted on, another figure rose along the timeline, Homo erectus. Taller, broader, and bolder, their brains averaged 900 cubic centimeters and continued to grow with each generation. They traveled farther, leaving Africa for Asia and Europe. They harnessed fire, crafted more complex tools, and may have begun the first steps toward shared culture. Fire was more than warmth or protection. It was a teacher. It brought people together. Around its gentle light, eyes met, gestures were exchanged, and stories, perhaps primitive at first, began to form. With cooked food, digestion became easier, freeing energy for the brain. This subtle change may have accelerated brain growth over time, allowing more neurons to flourish. In the landscape of the mind, language was beginning to take root. Not in the words we know today, but in shared sounds, rhythms, and expressions. The vocal tract, once adapted for breathing and chewing, began to allow finer control. The brain responded with new neural connections, strengthening the links between sound, memory, and intention. Homo erectus also showed signs of empathy. Fossils reveal individuals who lived long after injury, suggesting that others cared for them. In these acts of kindness, a different form of intelligence emerged, one built not only on survival, but on compassion and community. As brains grew, so too did the prefrontal cortex, the region responsible for complex decision-making and social understanding. This area helps us reflect on the past, plan for the future, and navigate relationships with subtlety. It is the seat of inner dialogue and long-term thinking. Meanwhile, the parietal lobes, which manage spatial awareness and body coordination, continued to develop. These areas were crucial for building tools, hunting in groups, and understanding the position of oneself within the environment. They also paved the way for drawing, for carving, and eventually for art. By 400,000 years ago, Homo heidelbergensis appeared, possibly the common ancestor of both Neanderthals and modern humans. With an even larger brain, approaching 1,200 cubic centimeters, this species hunted cooperatively and built shelters. They may have buried their dead. They likely understood seasons, migration, and memory in new ways. But it was not a straight path. Evolution meandered. Some hominin branches vanished, leaving no descendants. Others blended, exchanged genes, and disappeared into the genetic mist of time. Through it all, the brain continued to adapt, not through conquest or competition alone, but through the quiet power of learning and shared experience. Imagine now the slow pace of change. A child learning to flake stone from her elders, a hunter memorizing the stars, a group gathering beneath trees to mimic calls or signals. These are the invisible threads of progress, woven gently through gesture, observation, and patience. The brain did not grow from nothing. It grew from memory, from repetition, from the sacred act of passing knowledge from one being to another. And so, as we breathe deeply into this chapter of our journey, we find ourselves among ancient kin, creatures with hands like ours, eyes that watched the same stars, and minds that began to stir with dreams of something more. Let us now drift further toward the edge of what we recognize as truly human, where brain, body, and culture will soon converge. The winds of time now carry us to a quiet threshold, where ancient hominins gave rise to a new kind of being. A creature whose brain, though familiar in size, held the keys to memory, imagination, and self-awareness. Around 300,000 years ago, in the savannas and river valleys of Africa, Homo sapiens emerged. Their skulls were more rounded, their faces less pronounced, and within, an organ exceeding 1,300 cubic centimeters. A brain not only wired for survival, but for understanding. More than size, it was structure that set this brain apart. The neocortex, the brain's outermost layer, grew increasingly complex, granting deeper thought, better memory, and more layered emotion. The connections between regions grew richer, allowing for nuanced decisions and new ways of thinking. These early humans still hunted and gathered, much like their ancestors, but they did so with increasing cooperation. They shared tasks, watched over the young, and moved with intention. Their brains weren't merely reacting, they were interpreting, planning, remembering. Stone tools became more refined. Sharp blades, precise scrapers, and complex toolkits show us the workings of thoughtful minds. But something else began to stir, a quiet urge beyond function. Pieces of ochre, carved and marked with deliberate lines, appear in archaeological sites as early as 100,000 years ago. In those markings, the first signs of abstract thought glimmered. The brain had begun to turn inward, pondering the unseen, making meaning where once there was none. As humans spread from Africa into new lands, their minds traveled with them, carrying language, rhythm, and memory. We may never know exactly when language began, but it likely emerged gradually. Gesture became sound, and sound became meaning. The brain adapted. Regions like Broca's and Wernicke's areas, responsible for speech and comprehension, grew more integrated. Neural pathways formed highways of communication. Language allowed minds to share ideas precisely, transmitting thought from one brain to another. By 100,000 years ago, burial practices began appearing. Bodies were positioned carefully. Red ochre was sprinkled. Tools or ornaments placed beside the dead. These were not practical acts, they were symbolic. The brain had begun contemplating life, death, and what might lie beyond. Art, too, emerged. Handprints on cave walls, animal figures carved into rock, geometric patterns drawn with purpose. The parietal lobe, key for spatial awareness and visualization, enabled early humans to imagine and recreate what they saw or dreamed. These images were not just decorations. They were expressions of a thinking mind reaching out into the world. Music also took form. Simple bone flutes, tuned by breath and shaped by hand, date back tens of thousands of years. Perhaps these sounds soothed infants or echoed during rituals. The brain found harmony in rhythm, melody, and repetition, bringing people together, calming the nervous system, and stirring emotion. Meanwhile, the prefrontal cortex, where planning, empathy, and reasoning reside, grew more influential. With it came the ability to imagine future outcomes, to weigh choices, and to hold long-term goals. The brain became a place where possibilities were rehearsed before acted upon. Mirror neurons, cells that respond when we see others move or emote, helped deepen social connection. One person's laughter could stir another's. A smile could travel across a group. The brain was learning not just to survive together, but to feel together. By 50,000 years ago, human culture blossomed. Trade routes formed. Beads and ornaments were exchanged. Stories grew richer and language more structured. And through all of it, the brain continued to evolve, not in shape, but in complexity. Now, from birth, each brain was shaped not only by biology, but by culture. Language, music, memory, and art flowed into young minds, forming patterns and beliefs. The brain became both a tool and a tapestry, woven by hands and voices across generations. And so, as we pause here, we see the modern human brain not as a sudden invention, but as a slow bloom, a gift passed through countless lives, shaped by experience, language, and imagination. Let us gently continue now toward the age of agriculture, where minds would meet new challenges and build new worlds from the ground up. Around 100,000 years ago, something subtle but profound began to take root in the minds of early Homo sapiens. It wasn't a new tool or a change in diet. It was something invisible, yet transformative. The quiet emergence of symbolic thought and complex language. This development would gently unfold across millennia, but it would fundamentally reshape how humans experienced reality. In the quiet spaces of ancient Africa and beyond, early humans began to shape not just their environment, but their minds. The human brain, already complex, began to foster connections that allowed for shared meaning. Through sound, gesture, and later symbols, groups could transmit ideas not just about the present moment, but about the past and imagined futures. Language is not a single invention. It did not arrive overnight. Rather, it evolved slowly, built upon the neural foundations laid down by earlier primates and fine-tuned over hundreds of thousands of years. The vocal tract, flexible and responsive, developed alongside the brain's expanding capacity for memory, abstraction, and intentional communication. The Broca's area and Wernicke's area, two regions of the brain deeply involved in language production and comprehension, grew more sophisticated. These regions began working in harmony with visual, auditory, and motor areas, creating an intricate network that could shape and interpret sounds into meaning. Through language, information could be preserved, expanded, and shared across generations. Knowledge, once held only in the hands of the individual, could now be passed on, repeated, adapted, refined. Storytelling began, not just as entertainment, but as memory made communal. Myths, rituals, warnings, and wisdom took shape in the spaces between words and minds. And language did something more. It expanded the scope of human imagination. With words, humans could describe not only what they saw, but what they felt, hoped, feared, or dreamed. They could explain the unseen, explore the symbolic, and build mental models of the world that were far more complex than any single mind could hold alone. As language matured, it supported the birth of symbolic art. In caves, ochre-painted stones, and carved bone fragments, early humans left behind traces of abstract thought. These symbols were more than decoration. They were cognitive tools, extensions of memory and meaning. Some of the earliest known examples, such as the Blombos cave engravings or beads from North Africa, show a mind not only observing the world, but reflecting upon it. Language also reshaped social bonds. With richer communication came deeper cooperation, more elaborate social structures, and the sharing of intentions and goals. A hunting plan could be discussed, a future migration debated, a loss mourned together. The brain, once focused on survival in the moment, could now navigate emotional landscapes and cultural systems. The default mode network, a system within the brain linked to internal thought and self-reflection, became more active. This allowed for something new in the human experience: introspection. Through this, identity began to form not only through instinct, but through story, through the way one was remembered, named, and described. Symbolic thinking laid the groundwork for religion, mathematics, music, and philosophy. Even in their earliest forms, these expressions pointed to a brain deeply immersed in metaphor and metaphorical structure. Numbers, sacred rhythms, celestial cycles, all emerged as humans began to map the immaterial onto the material world. Yet for all its power, language remained bound to the physical architecture of the brain. It was shaped by constraints: memory capacity, auditory processing, emotional regulation. And so each language, while rooted in biology, also reflected the culture and environment of its speakers, a blend of neural possibility and lived experience. This phase of brain evolution, marked by communication and imagination, was less visible than stone tools or fire. But it carried perhaps the most enduring impact. It gave humans the means to become a storytelling species, a species that could project itself across time, space, and emotion. Through quiet conversations around ancient fires, whispered lullabies in the dark, and the carved marks of meaning etched into stone, the brain began to speak. And in speaking, it grew, it connected, it remembered. And slowly, softly, humanity began to shape not only its world, but its inner worlds, woven together by the fragile, powerful threads of language and symbol. Today, the human brain sits at the center of a world it once could not imagine. It navigates cities of glass and steel, scrolls through digital landscapes, and reaches across oceans without moving an inch. Yet within the folds of this 3-pound organ, soft, wet, and electric, still lie the deep echoes of its ancient past. From the very beginning, the brain was not designed. It was sculpted gently by time. It was shaped by pressures, by patterns of use, by challenges that forced it to become more efficient, more flexible, more aware. And it has never stopped changing. In this final phase of our quiet journey, we step not backward but forward, toward what the brain is becoming, and what it might still become. The modern human brain is remarkably plastic. It can rewire itself after injury, learn entirely new languages late in life, and adapt to tools and technologies that evolution never anticipated. This neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to reorganize its own structure, is one of its most astonishing features. It allows for resilience. for growth, for continuous learning across a lifetime. And yet, our brains are also vulnerable. They evolved in environments of scarcity, threat, and face-to-face interaction. In today's world of information saturation, long hours of stillness, and virtual communication, we often ask the brain to operate in unfamiliar ways. Attention spans are strained, memories are offloaded to devices, social cues are flattened into digital signals. And so, we find ourselves in a quiet tension between what the brain was built for and what it now must do. Still, the brain continues to adapt. Brain imaging studies have revealed that reading, for example, creates entirely new circuits, linking vision, language, and memory into patterns not found in any non-literate culture. Similarly, using digital interfaces appears to strengthen certain cognitive tasks while weakening others. The brain, as always, trades one capacity for another depending on what is needed most. But where is it headed? One possibility lies in augmentation, the integration of the brain with external systems. Brain-computer interfaces, neural implants, and AI companions all hint at a future where cognition may be shared, extended, or even merged with machines. It raises questions not just about capacity, but about identity. If the mind can reach beyond the skull, what remains truly human? Other paths may be subtler. Through meditation, cognitive therapy, and new models of education, humans may learn to regulate emotion more effectively, reduce suffering, and enhance focus, not by changing the brain's structure, but by working in harmony with it. One of the most beautiful and least understood aspects of the human brain is its capacity for metacognition, thinking about thinking. This reflective quality has allowed us not only to build civilizations, but to wonder about our own place in time. It lets us hold two ideas in tension, to feel awe, to question, to dream. From a purely biological standpoint, the brain is a system of neurons, chemicals, and blood. But in the lived experience, it becomes a space of color, sensation, memory, and emotion. It houses not just thought, but selfhood. Not just reaction, but meaning. Every person's brain is slightly different, shaped by genetics, by early experience, by chance. And yet, in their shared architecture lies a common thread, a deep hunger to understand, to connect, and to remember. As we close this gentle exploration, it is worth returning to a quiet truth. The brain that contemplates its own origin is also the product of that very journey. The mind is not apart from nature. It is nature looking inward. We began in the oceans with cells that could barely sense light. We grew spines, skulls, senses. We learned to walk, to speak, to wonder. And somewhere along that path, the brain became not only an organ of survival, but an instrument of meaning. It listens to music. It recalls faces. It dreams of what might be. It writes poems, studies stars, whispers to children. And sometimes, in the silence between thoughts, it simply rests, aware, alive, and utterly unique. The story of the brain is far from over. It continues in each moment of curiosity, each shared memory, each breath of insight. It continues in you,